When tech CEO Isabella Chen's luxury car breaks down in a working-class neighborhood, she expects the worst from the grease-stained mechanic who offers help. But what happens next will completely shatter her assumptions about worth, intelligence, and the true meaning of success. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell us in the comments, what's the most unforgettable act of kindness a stranger has ever shown you? The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Drive, as Isabella Chen's silver Tesla Model S suddenly lurched to a stop, steam rising from under the hood like a white flag of surrender. She gripped the steering wheel, her manicured nails drumming against the leather as panic began to set in. This couldn't be happening. Not today, not when she had the most important board meeting of her career in less than 2 hours. Isabella stepped out onto the cracked pavement, her designer heels clicking against the asphalt as she surveyed her surroundings. The neighborhood was a far cry from her usual Silicon Valley haunts. Small houses with peeling paint, chain-link fences, and corner shops with hand-painted signs in multiple languages. She felt completely out of place in her tailored navy suit, like a peacock that had wandered into a barnyard. Her phone showed no signal, and the nearest ride-share was 20 minutes away. 20 minutes she didn't have. Isabella's mind raced as she thought about the international investors waiting in that boardroom, ready to hear her pitch for the company's expansion into Southeast Asian markets. 5 years of work, all potentially crumbling because of a broken-down car in the middle of nowhere. "Excuse me, miss, you need some help." Isabella turned to see a man approaching from across the street. He was probably in his early 30s, wearing oil-stained coveralls and work boots that had seen better days. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and there were grease marks on his hands and forearms. Everything about him screamed blue-collar worker. Exactly the kind of person Isabella usually avoided eye contact with. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied curtly, not even looking at him directly as she fumbled with her phone again. The man, his name tag read, Miguel, stopped a respectful distance away, sensing her discomfort. "Your car's smoking pretty bad. Could be the radiator or maybe the cooling system. I run the shop just down the block." He gestured toward a small garage with a hand-painted sign that read, Santos Auto Repair. Isabella glanced at him dismissively. "I said I'm fine. I'll handle it myself." Miguel's expression remained patient, though Isabella caught a flicker of something, disappointment, in his eyes. "Okay, but if you change your mind, I'll be right over there. Sometimes these fancy cars can be tricky if you don't know what you're looking for." As he walked away, Isabella felt a twinge of guilt, but she pushed it aside. She had more pressing concerns than the feelings of some random mechanic. Her rideshare app finally loaded, showing a car still 15 minutes away. She paced beside her Tesla, checking her watch every few seconds as precious time slipped away. Miguel couldn't shake the image of the stressed woman by the broken-down car. He'd lived in this neighborhood for 8 years, ever since he'd taken over his uncle's shop, and he'd seen plenty of people in distress. But something about her desperation struck him. Maybe it was because he recognized the look. He'd worn it himself plenty of times as a single father trying to make ends meet. He glanced through the window of his shop toward the street corner where she stood. His 7-year-old daughter Sophia's drawing was taped to the window, a colorful picture of their family that included just the two of them, smiling under a rainbow. Sophia was at school now, but she'd be getting out in a few hours, and Miguel had promised to help her with her science project about different countries around the world. "Papa always says we should help people when they're in trouble," he could almost hear Sophia's voice saying. She had inherited his sense of compassion, something that both worried and made him proud. Miguel wiped his hands on a rag and walked back toward the stranded woman, approaching more slowly this time. "Look, I don't mean to bother you again," he said gently, "but I can see you're really stressed, and that car's not going anywhere on its own. I know you probably think I'm just some guy trying to rip you off, but I've got a daughter, and if she were stuck somewhere, I'd hope someone would help her." Isabella looked up from her phone, really seeing him for the first time. There was something genuine in his expression, a warmth that cut through her defenses. She noticed laugh lines around his eyes and a small scar on his chin that somehow made him seem more trustworthy, not less. I have an extremely important meeting, she admitted, her voice softer now. I can't be late. Wait, where's the meeting? Miguel asked. Downtown, the Meridian Tower. Isabella checked her watch again. In exactly 1 hour and 12 minutes. Miguel nodded thoughtfully. That's about 45 minutes from here, depending on traffic. Let me take a quick look under the hood. Maybe it's something simple. Isabella hesitated. Every instinct told her not to trust a stranger, especially one who looked like he'd never seen the inside of a boardroom. But desperation was creeping in, and her rideshare driver had just cancelled. Fine, she said. But I really don't have time for a lengthy diagnosis. Miguel smiled for the first time since they'd met. I'll be quick, I promise. He popped the hood and leaned in, his trained eye immediately spotting the problem. The upper radiator hose had burst, sending coolant all over the engine bay. It was a relatively simple fix, but one that would take at least 30 minutes with the right parts. Bad news and good news, Miguel said, straightening up. Bad news is your radiator hose is blown. Good news is I have the part you need, and I can fix it in about 25 minutes. Isabella's heart sank. 25 minutes? I'll never make it to my meeting. Miguel could see the panic building in her eyes. He made a decision that would surprise them both. What if I drive you to your meeting while my assistant works on your car? He offered. I have a pickup truck. It's not exactly luxury transportation, but it runs. Isabella stared at him in disbelief. You would do that? But you don't even know me. Nope, I don't, Miguel agreed. But like I said, if my daughter were in trouble, I'd hope someone would help her. For a moment, Isabella's carefully constructed walls crumbled. This stranger was offering to drop everything to help her, and she had been nothing but rude to him. She felt ashamed of her assumptions and her behavior. That's incredibly kind of you, but I couldn't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. Miguel was already pulling out his phone to call his assistant. Besides, what kind of neighbor would I be if I left someone stranded? 15 minutes later, Isabella found herself sitting in the passenger seat of a well-maintained Ford pickup truck, trying not to think about how her designer suit looked against the worn fabric seats. Miguel had insisted she sit up front rather than in the back, and he'd even cleared some of his daughter's coloring books from the seat. I should probably know your name if I'm going to be your chauffeur, Miguel said, as they pulled into traffic. Isabella Chen. She paused, then added quietly, Thank you for this. Really? No problem, Isabella. I'm Miguel Santos. He navigated through the busy streets with the confidence of someone who knew the city well. So what's this big meeting about? Must be pretty important. Isabella found herself opening up in a way that surprised her. Maybe it was the stress, or maybe it was Miguel's easy manner, but she began explaining about her company, the international expansion, and the investors who were waiting to hear her presentation. We're trying to expand into Southeast Asian markets, she explained. It's been my project for 5 years, and today's presentation could make or break the whole thing. Miguel nodded thoughtfully. That sounds exciting. What kind of company is it? Tech. We develop educational software for children. Isabella glanced at Miguel, wondering if he would even understand what she was talking about. Ah, like language learning programs? Miguel asked with genuine interest. Isabella was surprised by his perceptive question. Actually, yes. Among other things. We're particularly focused on making language learning more accessible and fun for kids. That's great. My daughter Sophia is learning Mandarin at school right now. She's always coming home with new phrases. Miguel smiled. Though I have to admit, I can barely help her with her homework anymore. Kids these days are so smart. You're learning Mandarin too? Isabella asked, impressed despite herself. Miguel chuckled. I try to keep up with her, but she's way ahead of me. I speak a few languages from growing up in this neighborhood. Spanish from my family, Portuguese from the Brazilian community, some Arabic from the Moroccan families on our block. But Mandarin is tough. Isabella stared at him. You speak Arabic? Un poquito, Miguel said with a modest shrug. The Hakim family runs the grocery store next to my shop. Their kids hang out there after school sometimes, and Mr. Hakim has been teaching me. It's only fair since I help his son with his car projects. As they sat in traffic, Isabella found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about the man beside her. Here was someone who spoke multiple languages, ran his own business, was raising a daughter alone, and was integrated into his community in a way that seemed both natural and intentional. How many languages do you actually speak? She asked. Miguel thought for a moment. Depends on what you mean by speak. Fluently? Spanish and English. But I can get by in Portuguese, French, Arabic, and like I said, I'm learning Mandarin with Sophia. Oh, and I picked up some Vietnamese from the Nguyen family who used to live next door. Isabella's mouth fell open. That's 7 languages. I guess. Never really counted. Miguel glanced at her curiously. Why? Is that weird? Weird? Miguel, I work in tech, and most of my colleagues speak maybe 2 languages. You're completely self-taught? Mostly. I mean, I took French in high school, but the rest I learned from neighbors, customers, friends. When you live in a community like ours, you pick things up. Miguel smiled. Plus, Sophia keeps me on my toes. She's determined to speak at least 5 languages by the time she's 10. Isabella was quiet for a moment, processing this information. She thought about her own privileged education, her MBA from Stanford, her assumption that intelligence and worth were somehow tied to degrees and income levels. Here was a man who had educated himself out of necessity and curiosity, who was raising a multilingual daughter while running a business and maintaining deep community connections. Tell me about Sophia, Isabella said softly. Miguel's whole face lit up. She's 7, going on 30. Smartest kid I know, but don't tell her I said that. It'll go to her head. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small photo, handing it to Isabella while keeping his eyes on the road. The picture showed a beautiful little girl with Miguel's dark eyes and a gap-toothed grin, holding up a certificate of some kind. That's from her school's cultural fair last month. She did a presentation about the different languages spoken in our neighborhood, interviewed all the families, made charts, the whole thing. Miguel's pride was evident in every word. Her teacher said it was college-level research. Isabella studied the photo, seeing the love and pride reflected in both their faces. She's beautiful. And brilliant, clearly. Gets that from her mom, Miguel said quietly, and Isabella sensed there was a story there she shouldn't pry into. They were getting close to downtown now, the gleaming towers of the financial district rising ahead of them. Isabella felt a strange reluctance for this journey to end. She was learning more about community, kindness, and intelligence from this mechanic than she had from months of corporate networking events. Miguel, can I ask you something? Isabella said as they pulled up to the Meridian Tower. Shoot. Why did you help me? Really? I was pretty rude to you back there. Miguel parked the truck and turned to face her. My uncle used to tell me that kindness isn't about whether someone deserves it. It's about who you choose to be. He smiled. Besides, you weren't rude. You were scared and stressed. We've all been there. Isabella felt tears prick at her eyes. I made assumptions about you. Terrible assumptions. Yeah, you did, Miguel agreed, but not unkindly. But you're here now, aren't you? Sometimes it takes a crisis to see past our own walls. Isabella looked up at the building where her future waited, then back at Miguel. I don't know how to thank you. Just knock 'em dead in there, Miguel said. And maybe think about what Sophia said about different communities having different kinds of intelligence. Might be relevant to your expansion plans. Isabella paused in the act of opening the truck door. What do you mean? Well, if you're expanding into Southeast Asian markets, you're going to need people who understand those communities from the inside, right? Not just the business side, but the cultural side, the language nuances, the family dynamics, the values. Miguel gestured toward the diverse streets around them. There's a lot of expertise in places you might not expect to find it. Isabella stared at him, her mind racing. He was absolutely right. Her expansion plans had focused on hiring expensive consultants and conducting market research, but she hadn't thought about tapping into the linguistic and cultural expertise that existed right in communities like Miguel's. You should come to my presentation, she said impulsively. Miguel laughed. Isabella, I don't think they let mechanics in navy overalls into fancy boardrooms. You're not just a mechanic, Isabella said firmly. You're a multilingual business owner with deep community connections and insights into cultural integration. You're exactly the kind of perspective we need. Miguel looked down at his work clothes, then back at Isabella. I appreciate the thought, but... Please, Isabella interrupted. I'm serious. What you just said about community expertise, that could revolutionize our entire approach. For a moment, Miguel was quiet. Isabella could see him weighing the decision, probably thinking about his daughter, his shop, all the reasons why this was a crazy idea. Okay, he said finally, but if security tries to throw me out, you're buying me lunch. 20 minutes later, Isabella stood at the head of a gleaming conference table, facing 12 investors from 6 different countries. Miguel sat quietly in the corner, looking remarkably composed, despite being the only person in the room wearing work clothes. Isabella's presentation began exactly as she had planned, with market research, profit projections, and expansion timelines. But as she spoke, she found herself thinking about Miguel's words, about Sophia's cultural fair project, about communities and connections she had never considered. Before we discuss the financial projections, Isabella said, deviating from her script, I want to talk about something I learned today about the importance of community-based cultural expertise. She gestured toward Miguel. This morning my car broke down in a neighborhood I'd never visited before. I was helped by Miguel Santos, who owns an auto repair shop and speaks 7 languages. Not because he went to expensive language schools, but because he lives in a diverse community and values connection with his neighbors. Several investors looked confused, but Isabella pressed on. Miguel made me realize that our expansion strategy has been focused on hiring expensive consultants to tell us about markets we want to enter, instead of partnering with people who are already living in those cultural intersections. She clicked to a new slide she was creating on the fly. What if, instead of just expanding our products into new markets, we created a network of community-based cultural consultants? People like Miguel, who understand language not just as vocabulary, but as community connection? One of the investors, an elderly Japanese man named Mr. Tanaka, leaned forward with interest. Please, continue. Isabella felt her confidence building. Imagine educational software developed not just by programmers and marketing teams, but in partnership with people who are raising multilingual children, who navigate multiple cultures daily, who understand the real challenges families face in maintaining cultural identity while integrating into new communities. She looked at Miguel, who gave her an encouraging nod. Miguel's daughter Sophia is 7 years old and is already conducting college-level research on linguistic diversity in her neighborhood. That's the kind of authentic cultural insight we should be incorporating into our products. Mr. Tanaka spoke up. This is a fascinating perspective. But how would such a model work practically? Isabella took a breath, then made a decision that surprised even her. Miguel, would you mind sharing your thoughts on community-based language learning? Miguel looked slightly panicked, but he stood up gracefully. Isabella watched as the investor's expressions shifted from skepticism to curiosity as Miguel began to speak. Well, Miguel began, his voice steady, despite the circumstances. I think the challenge with a lot of language programs is that they treat language like a subject in school instead of like a living thing that connects people. He paused, gathering his thoughts. In my neighborhood, kids don't just learn Spanish or Arabic or Vietnamese from textbooks. They learn it because they want to talk to Mrs. Nguyen about her garden, or because they want to understand the jokes Mr. Hakim tells at the grocery store, or because they want to help their classmates with homework. Miguel's nervousness seemed to fade as he found his rhythm. When my daughter Sophia learns Mandarin, she's not just memorizing words, she's learning about Chinese holidays from her friend's grandmother. She's understanding why certain phrases are respectful and others aren't. She's connecting language to real relationships with real people. The investors were listening intently now. Miguel continued, I think if you want to create educational software that really works, you need to understand that language learning is relationship learning, and relationships are built in communities, not in corporate offices. Mr. Tanaka nodded thoughtfully. And how would you suggest we incorporate this philosophy into our products? Miguel glanced at Isabella, who nodded encouragingly. Well, what if your software connected kids who are learning languages with kids who speak those languages natively? Not just for practice, but for cultural exchange. Like my Sophia could teach a kid in Shanghai about American holidays while learning about Chinese New Year. But more than that, Miguel continued, his confidence growing. What if you partnered with community centers, local businesses, cultural organizations? What if language learning was connected to real community service, real cultural participation? A younger investor from Singapore spoke up. This is brilliant. We've been thinking about language learning as a product to sell to communities, but you're suggesting we make communities part of the learning ecosystem itself. Isabella felt a surge of pride and excitement. Miguel had just articulated something she had been struggling to put into words for months. The difference between extracting value from communities and creating value with them. The presentation continued for another hour, but the tone had completely shifted. Instead of a traditional pitch meeting, it became a collaborative discussion about community partnership, cultural authenticity, and educational innovation. Miguel fielded questions with the same thoughtful intelligence he had shown in the truck, drawing on his experiences as a father, business owner, and community member. When the meeting finally ended, Mr. Tanaka approached Isabella and Miguel directly. Ms. Chen, this is the most innovative approach to international expansion I've seen in 20 years, he said. But I have a condition for our investment. Isabella's heart stopped. Yes? I want Mr. Santos to be part of your expansion team, as a cultural integration consultant. Mr. Tanaka smiled. And I want to meet his daughter Sophia. Any 7-year-old conducting college-level research on linguistic diversity is someone we should be learning from. Isabella looked at Miguel, who seemed stunned into silence. I run an auto repair shop, Miguel finally managed to say. Yes, and you also speak 7 languages, understand community dynamics, and just revolutionized our entire business model, Isabella replied. Miguel, I meant what I said earlier. You're not just a mechanic. You never were. 2 weeks later, Isabella stood in Miguel's auto repair shop, watching Sophia explain her latest school project to a group of software developers via video call. The 7-year-old was teaching them about code switching, how bilingual children naturally switch between languages depending on their emotional state and social context. See, when I'm happy, I talk in English because it feels bouncy, Sophia was saying, bouncing slightly to demonstrate. But when I'm sad or scared, I want my papa to talk to me in Spanish because it feels like a hug. The developers were frantically taking notes. This kind of insight would have cost thousands of dollars from traditional consultants, but Sophia shared it with the natural wisdom of a child who lived it every day. Miguel emerged from under the hood of a car, wiping his hands on a rag. He was still running the shop. That hadn't changed. But now he was also working part-time as a cultural consultant for Isabella's company, and his linguistic skills and community connections had already influenced 3 major product decisions. "How's the genius doing?" Miguel asked, nodding toward Sophia. "She just explained emotional linguistics to our development team better than any textbook could," Isabella replied. "I think we're going to need to put her on the payroll." Miguel laughed. "She's already negotiating for a college fund contribution instead of direct payment. Says she wants to study linguistics and community development when she grows up." Isabella watched Sophia finish her presentation with a bow, prompting applause from the developers on screen. "You know, Miguel, I've been thinking about what you said that first day, about kindness not being about whether someone deserves it." "Yeah? I'm starting to understand that intelligence and worth work the same way. They're not about what someone deserves based on their background or education. They're about recognizing the value that already exists in unexpected places." Miguel smiled. "Took you a while to figure that out?" "Hey, I got there eventually," Isabella protested with a laugh. "True. And you know what the best part is?" Miguel gestured around the shop, where Sophia was now helping one of the developers understand a concept by drawing pictures on the back of an invoice. "You didn't just learn something about community and intelligence. You helped create a community where Sophia's intelligence is valued, where my languages matter, where Mrs. Nguyen's cultural knowledge becomes part of educational software used by kids in 12 countries. Isabella nodded, thinking about the ripple effects of that morning 2 weeks ago. Her company's community partnership model was already being copied by competitors. 3 other tech firms had reached out to Miguel about consulting work. Sophia's school had started a program connecting students with community cultural experts. But more than that, Isabella had learned to see her own city differently. She now stopped for coffee at the Brazilian bakery near Miguel's shop, where she was slowly learning Portuguese from the owner's daughter. She had volunteered to help with Sophia's school's next cultural fair. She had discovered that her neighborhood was full of stories and expertise she had never bothered to notice. "There's something else," Isabella said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "The board approved funding for the community partnership program. We're starting with 5 neighborhoods in 5 different cities, each partnering with local cultural experts to develop authentic, community-based educational content." Miguel opened the envelope and stared at the check inside. It was more money than his shop made in 6 months. "This is to help you expand your consulting work, maybe hire someone to help with the shop so you can travel to the other pilot communities," Isabella explained. "But only if you want to. I learned my lesson about making assumptions about what people want." Miguel looked at the check, then at Sophia, who was now teaching the developers how to count to 10 in Vietnamese. "You know what, Isabella? I think Sophia and I are ready for an adventure." 6 months later, the Community Partnership Program had expanded to 12 cities across 4 countries. Miguel and Sophia had become minor celebrities in the educational technology world, speaking at conferences about authentic cultural integration and community-based learning. But the real success wasn't measured in revenue or recognition. It was measured in the thousands of children who were now learning languages through real cultural connections, in the community experts who had found new ways to share their knowledge, in the ripple effects of kindness and recognition spreading through neighborhoods around the world. Isabella often thought back to that morning when her car broke down, when she had been so focused on her own crisis that she almost missed the opportunity for genuine human connection. She had learned that intelligence comes in many forms, that community expertise is as valuable as academic credentials, and that kindness, both receiving it and giving it, can change everything. What did you think of Isabella and Miguel's story? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us about a time when kindness changed your life. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales that remind us of the extraordinary wisdom and generosity that exists in ordinary moments.